The Romanov Family Massacre, a dark chapter in history. In the early morning hours of July 17, 1918, a grisly and chilling event shook the foundation of modern Russian history, the massacre of the Romanov family. Once considered untouchable as the ruling dynasty of Imperial Russia, this tragic end marked the violent conclusion of more than 300 years of Romanov reign. But what truly happened that night in the infamous Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg? Why does this event continue to evoke mystery, intrigue, and debate? Join us as we uncover the harrowing story of the Romanovs, unravel the political chaos that led to their demise, and examine how this dark chapter in history remains one of the most enigmatic and poignant events of the 20th century. For over 3 centuries, the Romanov family ruled Imperial Russia, from the coronation of Michael I in 1613 to the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. Yet, Nicholas's time on the throne would herald an era of growing dissatisfaction and unrest. Known as a devoted family man but a weak and indecisive leader, Nicholas struggled to control the tides of rebellion that swirled ever closer to the monarchy by the turn of the 20th century. Russia at the time was a nation crippled by widespread poverty, military failure, and political turmoil. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905 and Russia's disastrous entry into World War I in 1914 sapped the people's trust in the monarchy. Hunger and exhaustion fueled riots, labor strikes, and calls for revolutionary change. In March 1917, facing mounting pressure from his people and his political advisors, Tsar Nicholas II made the dramatic decision to abdicate, effectively ending Romanov rule. The once invincible dynasty fell into the hands of a precarious provisional government, along with a rising Bolshevik influence led by Vladimir Lenin. After his abdication, Nicholas II, along with his wife Alexandra, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their young son Alexei, were placed under arrest. Initially detained at the Alexander Palace, they were moved to increasingly remote locations under the pretext of safety. Over time, it became clear that these relocations were less about protection and more about erasing them from public consciousness. In an unassuming house in Siberia, the Romanovs lived under constant watch, enduring harsh treatment and separation from the world they once ruled. The Tsarevich, Alexei, the sickly heir to the throne suffering from hemophilia, grew weaker during this confinement, tugging at the family's inner circle's already frayed nerves. Their final destination, however, was the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg, a building ominously labeled the House of Special Purpose by the Bolsheviks. There, their luxurious past was stripped away entirely, replaced with a grim existence defined by isolation and uncertainty. Guards confiscated their possessions, censored their communication, and ensured they had no contact with the outside world. On a quiet July evening in 1918, perhaps sensing an air of unease, the Romanovs went to bed as prisoners, unaware it would be their last night alive. Bolshevik forces were in a precarious position as the Russian Civil War intensified, with anti-Bolshevik White Army forces approaching Yekaterinburg. Fearing that the Romanovs might be rescued and used as a symbol to rally monarchist forces, the Bolshevik leadership expedited their execution. Orders were sent by the Soviet authorities: eliminate the Romanovs. In the early hours of July 17th, the family was awakened and informed they were being moved to avoid advancing threats. They were quickly dressed and led to a basement room, falsely told it was for their safety. Joining them in this cold, dimly lit chamber were their loyal attendants. As they stood together for what they thought was another phase in their confinement, armed men entered. A sudden declaration came. By order of Bolshevik command, they were to be executed. Before the Romanovs could process the words, gunfire erupted, cutting through the silence and ending the lives of an empire all at once. The Romanov family's execution was shrouded in secrecy for years, lending an air of conspiracy to an already grim chapter. The motivations behind the massacre were deeply rooted in the political climate of the time. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, were determined to sever all ties to the old regime. Allowing the Romanovs to survive presented a significant risk. The symbols of their monarchy could rally the White Army and monarchist supporters. As the Russian Civil War raged, this was a threat Lenin could not permit. The timing of the execution highlights the political necessity of the act. the approaching White Army brought with it the danger of liberating the Romanovs. The decision to kill the family was made quickly, with Lenin and the Bolshevik leadership emphasizing secrecy to avoid backlash from foreign governments and internal critics. Had the Romanovs been allowed to live, would the tides of the Russian Civil War have turned? What might have been the fate of Bolshevik rule had monarchist forces triumphed? These questions add layers of complexity to a cruel deed carried out in haste. Even after the executions, the Bolsheviks remained meticulous in covering their tracks. Fearing public outrage, they worked to make the family disappear as though they had never existed. The bodies of the Romanovs and their attendants were transported to a nearby forest and hastily buried. It wasn't until decades later that the world began to unravel the mystery of their whereabouts. In 1979, the suspected remains were uncovered by amateur investigators but were kept a secret until the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Forensic studies confirmed the identities of the Romanovs through DNA testing, but questions lingered. 2 bodies were missing. These gaps in historical evidence fueled rumors for decades. Could Anastasia, the youngest Romanov daughter, or Alexei, the Tsarevich, have survived? The tantalizing idea of escape spun a web of myths and imposters, most famously Anna Anderson, who claimed to be Anastasia. The murder of the Romanovs was not the end of their story. As the years passed, they became a symbol of tragedy, martyrdom, and the violent upheaval of revolution. In 1981, the Russian Orthodox Church abroad canonized Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children as martyrs. Later in 2000, they were declared saints by the Russian Orthodox Church inside Russia. Monuments, exhibitions, and films depicting their lives and tragic deaths emerged throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. In Russia today, the Romanovs' legacy remains divisive. To some, they represent the cruelty of the old regime, a reminder of an aristocracy detached from the needs of the people. To others, they are a family whose suffering marked the end of a golden age. One of the most profound symbols of remembrance came in 1977, when the Ipatiev house, the site of their execution, was demolished by Soviet authorities under orders from then-leader Boris Yeltsin. Decades later, the site was transformed into the Church on the Blood, a stark and sacred reminder of the family's tragic fate. The story of the Romanovs continues to evolve even today. In recent years, forensic investigations have revisited their remains to confirm identities and study additional evidence. In 2007, researchers located and identified the missing remains of Alexei and one of his sisters, ending debates about their survival. Yet, the fascination with their story endures. From historians to treasure hunters, many are drawn to the Romanovs' opulent lives and grim deaths. The massacre serves as a chilling reminder of how power, revolution, and political change collide in history's darkest moments. The Romanov Family Massacre is far more than the tragic end of a royal dynasty. It is a lens through which we can better understand the cost of revolution, the fragility of institutions, and the indomitable human fascination with mystery and legacy. As we reflect on this dark chapter, we are reminded of the small, enduring question at the heart of history. Could it have ended differently? Perhaps that is why the story of the Romanovs refuses to fade. Their fate was fixed, yet their legacy remains fluid, shaped by time, memory, and unending curiosity. What do you think led to the violent culmination of their lives? How should history remember the Romanovs? In tragedy, in martyrdom, or as a cautionary tale? Share your thoughts in the comments as we delve further into history's long and often dark shadow.